Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us and thanks for being part of our community. My name is Ryan Heffernan and I'll be your host for today. A few reminders before we get started. If you're having issues viewing the live stream during this presentation and are using the web browser version of Teams, please refresh your browser. If you're using the desktop app of Teams, please exit and rejoin. Those two things seem to resolve most of the technical issues people run into. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared publicly. We will post the recordings on our community at aka.ms/security-webinars. Please note that all the links I'm sharing here in this mentioning are already pasted in the live event Q&A window, so check those out if you need to click on them. Closed captions will be available in several languages during the live broadcast. You can enable them by clicking on the CC button located at the lower right corner of your screen. Feel free to ask questions at any time by typing them in the live event Q&A window by clicking on the Ask a Question button. Be aware that any questions you post will be publicly visible. However, if you prefer, you can post your question anonymously by checking the box right below where you enter it. We often get a lot of questions on these webinars, and we will do our best to answer them all in real time. But in the event that we're unable to get to your question, please post it at aka.ms/Azure Purview Community. We love to hear your feedback on how we can improve these webinars, and you can give it to us at aka.ms/security-webinar-feedback. I would also like to invite you to join our public community by visiting aka.ms/security-community. That's the best way to ensure that you don't miss any future webinars or major announcements. On our community, you can speak directly to our engineering teams that create our security products. You'll be able to influence our product designs and get early access to changes by doing things like participating in private previews, which you can do at aka.ms/securityprp, requesting features, giving feedback, reviewing our product roadmaps, registering for events, or joining webinars like this. We believe that the best way to improve our products is by removing any barriers between you and the people that create them. So we hope you'll join us. Today's topic is discover multi-cloud data in Purview. So it's a very exciting one, and we're really getting ready to do this. It should be a great topic today. Our presenter is Kevin McInerney. He's a senior program manager with our Azure Purview team, so he has deep expertise in this subject. So without further ado, I will turn it over to him. Kevin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ryan. So welcome, everyone. As Ryan said, my name is Kevin McInerney. I am Senior Program Manager in the Information Protection Customer Experience Engineering team, and I work with the Azure Purview product, and today we'll be talking about Purview and the multi-cloud features around Purview. Azure Purview is a product that was announced by Satya last November. Purview focuses on data governance for operational data and managing your data being stored in clouds by applications. So let's talk a little bit about the motivation behind the creation of Purview and the problem we're trying to solve. When we started to engage with customers early on in the creation of Purview, we heard loud and clear about the need for a comprehensive data governance solution. Industry research in this space tells us that we're looking at a never-before-seen volume, velocity, and variety of data, but also that today organizations are having a hard time putting that data to work to generate value. Companies today are struggling with knowing what their data is, where it is located, and of course, what the risk exposure looks like. The charter of the Chief Data Officer has expanded from digital transformation to making data discoverable and maximizing its business value. But to get there, we must first understand what data exists where and how to make it available to data consumers across the organization. We also need to work cross-discipline with security and compliance to ensure that risk is managed. So some of the questions raised today range from what do I have, where did it come from, all the way to what risk am I being exposed to and how do I control access and usage. And this makes sense. Well-managed data sets are easier to secure and keep compliant. And when security and compliance are integrated in data governance, they become an enabler rather than an end-of-process speed bump with an inevitable specter of rework. And nothing has made that clearer than the data privacy challenges that have emerged in recent years. Privacy requirements today clearly span both data management and security. And that brings us to Azure Purview. So let's talk about how Azure Purview can help you to reimagine data governance from a manual, costly, time-consuming effort to a cloud-native, purpose-built service to address your discovery and compliance needs. Azure Purview is a unified data governance service that helps you manage and govern your on-premises, multi-cloud, and software as a service data. Purview enables you to create a holistic, up-to-date map of your data landscape and automated data discovery, sensitive data classification, and end-to-end data lineage. Purview achieves all of this using a unified data map. The data map is the heart of Purview. It automates the extraction and management of metadata at scale across your multi-cloud and hybrid data estate. You can then apply classifications to the data, qualifying its business value using more than 100 built-in classifiers, Microsoft Information Protection sensitivity labels, and also custom classifiers. The data catalog enables data customers to find trustworthy, valuable data using an intuitive semantic search and browse experience. Within this experience, stewards can standardize business terms and definitions with the help of a business glossary. And additionally, the data map understands data as it relates to each other and captures end-to-end data lineage. Data insights provide chief data officers and security and compliance teams with a bird's eye view into their data estate. With the help of these various reports, you can now drill down on data usage and sensitivity across all your data sources and assets. We'll dive into each of these pillars further during the demo, but first I'd like to talk to you about where we're headed in the multi-cloud space. Customers today often store their data in multiple clouds. Some organizations have a multi-cloud strategy to reduce reliance on a single provider, so they store their data across multiple providers, including Azure, AWS, Google's, and others. Other organizations may allow their departments to choose their own cloud providers, resulting in data being stored across the multiple services. This presents a challenge for data officers and CISOs who now must use solutions and many different cloud providers to manage their data. Because of this, they face many challenges like a lack of a consolidated view of their data and inconsistent or duplicated classification mechanisms and policy in various different clouds. This is both time-consuming and prone to implementation challenges when providers don't have similar capabilities. With Azure Purview, we offer a unified data solution to manage your entire data estate across multiple clouds. This addresses the main need for customers to have a single solution for data governance. In this diagram, we can see the concept of Purview. At the bottom, we can see examples for cloud services where customers usually store their data. On the left here, we can see examples of both unstructured storage like Azure Blobs and Azure Data Lake, as well as structured data sources like SQL, Synapse, and Cosmos DB. We expand this concept to non-Azure clouds, where we have Amazon S3 storage, which is supported today, and other services that will be coming in the future. The concept of Purview is that we offer connectors for each of these services where customers can define which services they want to scan. We scan these services on multiple layers. First, we scan the metadata of the files or the table columns, and then we scan the content itself, where we identify sensitive data that's being stored in these services using classification matches and regular expressions. And all of this is stored in the Purview data map, which allows us to build services on top like the catalog and insights. The catalog allows admins to search and browse through the data and annotate the data, adding glossary terms and contact information related to the owners of the data. For example, if an admin wants to know where all of the social security numbers are that are stored in their scanned assets, they can quickly locate this data, whether it is stored in Amazon S3 buckets, Azure Blob Storage, or in SQL databases. The Insights service shows reports related to the security and compliance of your data. Here we can get a high-level view of the sensitive data that we found with the ability to drill down to the specific locations where the data is stored. In this diagram, we can see the high-level architecture of Purview and how it scans data in remote clouds. So here on the right, you can see that we have a Microsoft account that hosts the scanning service in the Amazon cloud, and this is where the scanning of the data takes place. Microsoft maintains this scanning service, so there's nothing that you'll have to install or maintain in AWS. We use this scanner to scan the customer data stored in AWS Cloud and then send the scanning results over to the Azure Purview data map back in Azure. So none of the sensitive data is actually stored by our scanner. It simply sends metadata related to scanned assets and classification data back to Azure. So all a customer has to do is create an AWS role to allow the scanner to read the data in the AWS account or specific buckets. The main point here is that the customer data is never sent out of the AWS cloud, and all scanning is done within the AWS cloud, and only the metadata results are passed back to the data map. But let's get into the demo, and we can actually see how all of this works. So we'll get started by looking at the home screen of Azure Purview. Here you can search for data using the Purview data catalog. Below the search bar, we have links to the Knowledge Center, as well as links to register and browse data sources and manage the glossary. We can also see a list of recently accessed items down here below. So when we click on the Register Sources button, this brings us to a view of the Sources page. Here you can organize your various sources into collections based upon the location and business units that are responsible for those sources. So here we can see that we have this organized into both cloud and on-premises data, and then further delineated down into different regions, different cloud providers, and then even different business groups where you can see the different things organized within the catalog. So it's inside here that you go ahead and add new assets and then scan them to be able to bring data into the catalog. So we can also view this as a table view where we would see all of the different assets at an easy glance and be able to quickly add scans and things of that nature. So to register a new data source, we would click here on the register button at the top of the screen. And here we see the various sources currently supported by Azure Purview. These include Azure sources like Data Lake and Azure SQL, multi-cloud locations like Amazon AWS S3, and on-premises data sources like Oracle, SQL, and Teradata, Power BI web workspaces, and some SaaS applications like SAP. So after registering the data sources, we can then come over and create a scan. So we can very easily click on Scan the Data. We test the connection to make sure that it is working. Once we see that successful, we can hit Continue. We're currently authenticating with a Purview Managed Service Identity. In here, we can choose the different scope of the data. So if we wanted to just scan, say, one folder in here, we could do that and then continue on. Then we would select a scan rule set. There are default scan rule sets that are created for each different asset type, and those can be used to scan all of the different supported file types and for all of the classifications that we have in the system. If you have custom classifications that you have made, you could create a custom scan rule set and then be able to use that for scanning those assets. Next, we would set a scan trigger, and we can do this as either a recurring or a one-time scan. So with recurring scans, you can do this every month or every week. If you needed something more frequently, then you could set up multiple weekly scans on different days to be able to achieve multiple scans per week. The one-time scan, you simply just hit that and hit continue, and that's all you have to do to be able to scan your data into the environment. So after the data has been scanned and brought into the data map, we're able to create additional insights to help you better understand your data. Insights are one of the key pillars of Purview. These reports provide a unified view of your catalog and aim to provide specific insights to data source administrators, business users, data stewards, and security admins. We'll start with the asset insights. This report gives a bird's eye view of your data estate, showing the number of sources being scanned, the number of discovered and classified assets, and the asset count per source type. So here we have just this easy view of all of our source types, but if we wanted to see where all of our passport numbers are, we could very easily drill down to any specific classification and see where those classifications are being stored within the assets. Next, we have the scan insights. This report enables administrators to understand the overall health of the scans which are taking place each week and whether those scans were successful or failed. The Glossary Insights report can help business users and data stewards to understand the distribution of glossary terms by status and help them to learn how many glossary terms are attached to which assets. We also get this nice cloud of different information where we can see the glossary terms and how frequently they are being attached to the different assets. And we have some different term status graphs to be able to show the status of our current glossary terms. Now let's take a look at classification insights. This report provides details about where classified data is located and allows users to drill down to the classified assets themselves. So here we have several graphs showing the distribution of classified files across both structured and unstructured data sources. We could drill into these using the View More button, and this allows us to find information related to specific classifications. For instance, if we wanted to quickly understand where all of our credit card data is being stored, we could type credit here and select that classification, and that will bring up the credit card numbers Sorry about that, clicked on the wrong thing. So we can click on credit card. And then we can drill down into this to see where all of our credit card information is being stored. So here we can see that we have Amazon S3 buckets that are currently storing credit card information. So this has taken us to the catalog, and we can click on the HR department And so, for instance, let's say the HR department shouldn't be storing credit card information, and we know this. So we've clicked on that, and we can now go to the asset where we can find what that information is that is stored within this asset. So we open up this asset, and we can see here in the schema that there is absolutely a column name of Visa, and that the credit card number and debit card number have been identified here. So if we wanted to quickly identify contacts for that, we could click here and then select the mail icon to be able to quickly send an email to the owner of that asset to find out why that asset is being stored inside of that bucket. You may have also noticed that this asset has a sensitivity label assigned to it. So these sensitivity labels are set up within the M365 Compliance Center, and you can now use Azure Purview to automatically label assets and tables on the conditions set in the sensitivity label in the Security Compliance Center. So let's take a look at how that works. Here I have the Security Compliance Center open, and I'm editing a sensitivity label. Under the label scope, we now have the option to apply labels to Azure Purview assets. For files and emails, Purview uses the same criteria that you have defined for your other Microsoft Information Protection applications. The additional thing here is that you can also define auto-labeling for database columns separately. This gives you the flexibility to auto-label database columns even if you're not using auto-labeling for files and emails. And that brings us back to our insights, where we actually have a labeling report or sensitivity labels report inside our insights. This report is similar to the classification insights, but allows you to specifically target labeled assets, which can consist of multiple classifications. So similar to the classification insights, you can drill down to discover more, and you can see the different sources that contain the different types of data. So we can click here on either the files like we did before, or we can click on tables, and it will take us directly to the tables inside of the catalog where that data is stored. And the last insights report we have is the file extension insights. Which normally would show us all of the different files and how they're distributed across the environment, but I apologize, it isn't working today. So this would allow you to see the different types of files that are scanned within Purview, and then you could drill down to see which types of files that you have, where they're stored, and whether they're scannable for sensitive data. So insights reports are an easy way to look at your data map and be able to find the data that you're looking for across all of your data sources. However, you can also directly search the catalog if you wanted to do a more targeted search. So here, if we just search for everything, we can bring up the entire data catalog. But for instance, if we wanted to audit our Amazon S3 data sources to determine if they contain sensitive data, we can filter by the Amazon S3 asset type. And then that brings up all of the buckets that we have down here, as well as the classifications that we have for that data. So if we wanted to see all of our Amazon S3 buckets that contain credit card numbers, we could very easily drill down by clicking credit card number. And again, we come back to those same 3 buckets where we found that credit card information. And if we were to drill into the HR department, we're back to that same location that we were at, that we were able to get to from the insights. So we were able to very quickly narrow down the scope of the catalog to be able to find sensitive information within the catalog. Another powerful use case for Azure Purview is the ability to be able to apply your MIP sensitivity labels to structured assets and have that label flow downstream locations like Power BI. So here we have an Azure SQL table with a column that's been classified as credit card and has a label applied as secret. So now we can go and take a look at a Power BI data set where that database is connected to. And we can see here that that data set was also labeled secret downstream. If we go into a specific report, we can open that up in Power BI, and we can see that that secret label has propagated all the way down to the files itself. And this is powerful because now when you export data from this report, that data will also be protected with Microsoft Information Protection. So you can see here that we have some file permissions set on this PDF. And if we were to use the PowerPoint export, we could see that that would be classified as secret. And that classification goes all the way down to the files that have been exported from Power BI. So we also have data lineage that we can take a look at within Purview. So here we can see a nice example of the data lineage coming from flat files as well as databases, going through an Azure Data Factory data flow and being propagated down into other SQL databases, and then all the way to Power BI in some for several different tables. So we can watch as that data flows from end to end, and then we can be able to understand that data better. Additionally, if we were to have that data going to Azure Data Share, you can also track things through Azure Data Share and see where that data ended up. So we can see that we had a customers list here that's flowed down through into an Azure Data Share and has ended up within this Azure Data Lake. So it's a great way for you to understand where that data is, and it allows you to see the full flow all the way through all of your assets in Azure Purview. So we would like, if you're interested in Azure Purview and getting started with us, and you'd like to connect further with us to be able to find out about more of the private preview stuff and things of that nature, we can go to aka.ms/contact Purview PMs, and this will allow you to fill out a form that will directly get to us and our team and be able to allow us to get in touch with you to be able to help mold and shape the multi-cloud story as it is evolving. We have some links here for Purview documentation, as well as for the Amazon S3 specific documentation. And then we also have a link for Purview pricing in case you're interested in the preview pricing as it is today. So now let's go ahead and open it up. Do we have any questions that we'd like to talk about, Arvin?
Sure, yeah, we got a couple of different kinds of questions. I think one that hasn't been answered yet actually is, do you happen to know how does Purview handle SQL databases that are using TDE? So that's essentially transparent data encryption.
That is not something that I'm actually aware of how that's handled. So we would have to take that back and answer that offline. Apologies for not having any more information on that.
Can you give some details on the Purview GA timeline?
So since this is not under NDA, we can't specifically talk about the Purview GA timeline, but I believe it is looking for, later this year. It should be within the, end of this year. I can't give any more specific information than that.
Just to add a little to that, that's a case where we can give a lot more detail if you're in our private preview program, which you can sign up for by going to aka.ms/securityprp.
couple more questions. Can you talk about granting read access to an Azure resource for Azure Purview? What kind of a Microsoft account is used by Purview? So I believe this question is more along sort of the workflow for scanning and how some of that permissions are granted around that.
Sure, absolutely. So why don't we go back over here into Purview, and we could actually take a look at the scanning, and we can see the way that the assets are authenticated. So, here when we go into a scan, we have different credential types depending upon the type of data that is being accessed. So for blob storage and ADLS and things like that, we have a Purview managed service identity, which we can then give data reader access to those assets to be able to read that information in those assets. So you could also assign this to a group. If you have a group that has access to multiple different assets that has that data reader access, then you could assign the MSI to that. For other types of assets, like on-premises assets, so here Oracle, we can basically put in the information for the driver and then do the credentials as they're stored inside of our admin. So another thing that we didn't really get into is how we store credentials in Purview. So for things like the Amazon role ARN and for SQL on-premises authentication, we store these things in the Purview Key Vault. So we attach Key Vault connection to Purview, which allows us to securely store those connection strings and passwords so that you don't ever actually type passwords into Purview itself.
Arvind, looks like you're still
Sorry.
on mute. Oh,
sorry, I was talking. A couple more questions. So the question is this included with P1 or P2 licenses?
So Azure Purview is not licensed via the P1 or P2 SKUs or even the E3, E5 SKUs. Some of the capabilities, such as the auto classification, is required to have the E5 SKU or the P2 SKU in order to do that auto classification. But that's not Purview itself. That is just the capability to auto classify files within Purview. So that would be necessary in order to do that auto classification. But for Purview itself, it is done on a usage model. So that information is in that Purview pricing, aka.ms link that we have both in the chat window and also on the slide earlier. And it talks about the hours or the cost per hour. And that is usage based as opposed to license based.
Could you give there's a couple of questions on will there be an additional charge for Purview? Can you give a quick overview on pricing?
So I don't have a slide specific to pricing, but the Azure pricing page is available at aka.ms/purview pricing. And we can see here the price per capacity unit. A lot of things are currently free in the public preview. We have not defined what those are going to be costing in the GA timeframe. More information will come out with that later in the year. But we do have some information here on the different pricing that we have for the vCore hours and per capacity unit hours for Purview.
Could you give any details on whether Purview eliminates the need to use AIP scanner?
So Purview and AIP scanner are different. They're pointed at different locations. So AIP scanner is meant for use with your on-premises file shares and SharePoint storage locations. So they are on-premises repositories that are around, Office 365 type information. Purview is more aimed towards infrastructure data. So it's going to be your data that you have stored in infrastructure clouds, as well as some structured data that is on premises. We are investigating into possibly using Purview for scanning SMB assets, but that is not something that is currently in the product.
No other questions on the chat at the moment. Folks, if you do have any additional questions, though, do feel free to put them in the chat while we have Kevin.
And while we see if there's any additional questions there, I'll just give a little bit more information here as we're wrapping up. So if you want to see what webinars are upcoming, please be sure to go to aka.ms/security-webinars. That is also where we will post the recording and slide deck for this webinar. So be sure and check that out. I have not seen any additional ones roll in. So with that, let's wrap it up. I want to, sorry, go ahead.
Kevin, could you go to that next slide real quick?
Perfect. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
So with that, I want to thank our folks behind the scenes, Arvind and Alex, answering questions and helping. Let's see, we may have one more here. There's one around setting up alerts, like if we see credit card data in the HR department.
So we do have some of that happening in our private previews. So if you are interested in alerting through Azure Security Center and things of that nature, please do contact us via the contact form. I'm going to come back a few slides just so that I have that on the screen. You can use this QR code or go to the aka.ms contact Purview PMs. If you are interested in some of the new capabilities that will be coming out or finding out more about our roadmap and the things that we have coming in the future, please definitely do that, or you can join the private preview program through the security community.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. All right, with that, I'll thank all the folks involved behind the scenes, Arvind and Alex helping us answer questions and that sort of thing. Thanks, of course, to Kevin for a fantastic presentation. Most of all, thanks to all of you for being part of our community. We hope to see you next time. Goodbye.